Hello, subscribers. Welcome to a brand new interview. We have Adam Haase here, the creator of Realms of Antiquity, an amazing RPG on the TI-99 slash TI-99 emulator. So welcome, Adam.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've streamed your game quite a few times, and I have really enjoyed it. I've played many RPGs over the years, and I can honestly say that yours is for sure in the top 10 list of all time for me.
Wow,
So,
thank you.
oh, no, thank you for making such an awesome game. It's I'm going to let you talk more about it, but just from my perspective, and I've told my subscribers as I've been streaming it, it has a feel, definitely a feel of a retro game, kind of Ultima like, but it's actually to me far superior to Ultima. And that's a big thing, and I because I know Ultima was a big influence for you. But
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, it's a fantastic game. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, for people that don't know as much about you and that are fans of yours, I was hoping we could get some information about you personally. And
Okay.
so that's where we'll start. So the first question I have for you is about when were you born? If you don't want to give a specific year, that's fine. But if you just want to give the decade.
I was born in 75. Actually, my birthday is this Friday on July 16th.
Oh,
So
nice. Nice. Well, happy birthday early. Where do you live?
I live in Washington State, just outside of Seattle.
Okay, cool. Have you always been there or?
I've lived in Washington State all my life, but I've lived in different places. I was born in Centralia, which is down below Olympia. Then I lived in Cedar Woolley for a while, which I really that's kind of the if I when I think of home, Skagit Valley is home. But my dad got a transfer, so we ended up living in Eastern Washington for about 15 years, and then I moved back to the West Side to pursue a career with software engineering.
Oh, cool.
Since then, I've lived various places around the Seattle area since.
Nice. Nice. Is it really as rainy as what they always claim it is?
No, actually, Seattle is renowned for having more gray sky days than sunny days, but the actual rainfall is less than New York City.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we kind of keep it a secret. We tell everyone, "Oh yeah, no, it rains horribly here. You don't want to move here."
That's one way to keep people out. Oh, that's funny. So you mentioned software engineering. Is that your primary profession?
Yeah, I'm a senior software engineer with Nordstrom now.
Oh, nice. Cool. What kind of technologies do you guys use?
Oh, Java, Kafka streams. Right now, I'm in the supply chain side of it, so we're working at modernizing a lot of older systems. So,
Oh, nice. I bet that's a challenge sometimes.
oh, indeed. Well, I mean, these warehouses run on like ancient IBM databases, which will never be replaced because you can't do it cost effectively. The only thing you can do is keep them running until they fall apart and then replace them.
Right,
So,
right. You have your own company.
yeah, I mean, company of one, really. So,
Yeah, and that's Coyote,
Chaotic software.
Chaotic Software. Okay. And what's your website address?
That's chaotic.adamantier.com.
Okay, so as we all know, you're the mastermind behind Realms of Antiquity. But before we get into that, I know you've created some other games you've mentioned, like on the Lost Sectors when Chris and Matt interviewed you. Were any of those released to the public, or were they just kind of more like for your training and just playing around?
They're primarily for training and in like for example before Realms of Antiquity, one of the things I did was I wrote a program called Wizard's Doom, which was a spiritual sequel to a series of games on the TI from the 80s. And because it was a spiritual sequel and I even copied the original manual's design and their logo, I did not feel like I could really charge anything for that because that's not really my property. I think I charged a mail. I had a small number of manuals printed and I mailed those out to people for like the cost of shipping. So fortunately, when the actual original designer showed up, on the CRPG Addicts post about it. He was actually pretty cool about it. He didn't get all upset. So
Nice. That's awesome. It was probably an honor for him, for you to do something like that.
yeah, and that one was a different kind of game from Realms of Antiquity because it's a 3D dungeon, but because it ran in extended basic, I had to use machine language extensions to speed it up. And it actually, I'm pretty pleased with the overall how it came out. So
Nice. Do you still have that somewhere where someone could go download it or take a look at it?
yeah, there's a link to it on Atari Age on the TI forums. It might be buried by now, and I believe it's also up at there's a TI website that collects software, so I know it's all up there.
Nice. What about any other kind of gaming related tasks? Have you done anything else kind of gaming related, whether it's like a dungeon master, a game master, where you did tabletop stuff? Did
Oh,
you?
my brother, his primary hobby is tabletop role playing, has been since we were kids. So pretty much hand in hand. Like in fact, I play in his game tonight. In fact, we started doing when the COVID hit, we started doing virtual gaming, and since still lives in Eastern Washington, that's like the only way we can game together. But we've been basically virtually gaming now for 3 years, and it works pretty well.
So, Realms of Antiquity, we're going to get into the the big amazing game here. You talked about it again on the Lost Sectors interview a little bit, about what inspired you, but I know this is, from my perspective, a huge open-ended RPG that has, all kinds of side quests and just slew of things to find out and lots of adventuring. What inspired you or motivated you to make that kind of game?
Well, part of it was I always have enjoyed open-ended CRPGs. I think the frankly to me the true holder of that crown in the modern era is Skyrim. Because you can go anywhere in Skyrim, you can do things in any order, and you can just basically and you can play it any way you want. So they do a really good job with that. It almost is too much, if I'm being honest. Because there's not really any there's maybe a small underlying main plot, but you don't ever have to follow it. So
Cool.
yeah, I wanted to do a game that was open-ended, but I also didn't want it to be like Ultima where everything's the same everywhere you go, because it's like it doesn't matter what city you start at, because everything's the same everywhere.
Yeah.
In fact, internally in the game engine, I know when the reason it records the number of steps you have taken is because when you go over a certain number is when it expands the range of random monsters, so
Hmm.
that then you start getting the more powerful monsters spawning at random.
Wow. I did not know that.
So what I wanted to do was make it so there was both linear but not linear, so to provide different pathways
Hmm.
that you could take, and that monsters would only gradually get stronger the further you move away from the starting location.
Hmm.
So, and in that case, I tried to err on the side of I would rather make things too weak rather than too powerful.
Yeah.
So,
No, that was, I think you achieved that because when I was playing, that is what I experienced. And I know you were helping me on the streams quite a bit because I had no idea where I was going, which is good. I like that. I like not knowing where I'm going and having to explore. The problem I had was I was playing too infrequently because I was mixing too many games in at the same time. And so when I'd come back to it, I hadn't taken notes and I had to rethink, okay, because it is such a large game. I'm like, what was I doing? Where was I going? And you'd provide that feedback on that. But it did feel like, yeah, there were certain areas I'd go to and I started noticing, yeah, the monsters are getting quite a bit harder here. So obviously I've progressed to a harder area of the game.
yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up is that modern CRPGs tend to be literally arrow pointing to where you're supposed to go and massive quest log detailing everything you've done so far and everything you're supposed to do. And well, that's not old school CRPGs, because old school CRPGs didn't have the memory to store that kind of thing. It was also kind of viewed as like come on, break out a piece of notebook paper, write it down. But those games are very difficult for a streamer who's trying to play multiple games to handle. I mean, it is true that a more modern game design is actually easier to do in a streaming platform, because then it's like, oh, what was I doing again? Oh yeah, thank you, game, for telling me. Because
Yeah. No, I like having it more of a challenge like that where it's not hand holding and it gives you enough clues where you still have to kind of figure things out, but it gives you enough information to make sure you can solve it. It's not impossible. Like some of the old CRPGs, they would give you either no clues for something or it was so cryptic you had no idea where to go. So I have not felt that way at all with Realms of Antiquity, and it actually, for me personally, has encouraged exploring when they'll give some kind of vaguish clue, but I kind of know what it's talking about. So I think you've achieved a really great thing with that.
yeah, I really did want to encourage exploration as much as possible. At one point, I don't know if I mentioned it in the sector Lost Sectors interview, is I originally intended there to be no experience point system. You had to explore and find artifacts that would then artificially raise your level.
Yeah,
And
I
then
remember. Yeah, you talked about them being called milestones.
right, milestones. But I went away from that design because I realized it was a little too radical, and it's still an exploitive. It could still be exploited by some people, to level up quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I think you made a good choice. I think it still would have been cool the other way too, but you're right. I think if you're trying to appeal to more people, not going too drastic. So it's been out for a little while. Not a really long time, but a pretty good amount of time. Are there any new features? Because I know there are. Describe the new features that you've put in since day one release.
Oh, I made lots of, mostly it's small interface design changes based on feedback from people who've played and won the game, sometimes multiple times in a row. Uh, a big one was like I want to be able to examine items in stores before I buy them. See, old school mind is like buy it, look at it, and reload your game, for crying out loud. Take notes. But, I was like, okay, no, I should probably make that change. So that got done, plus examining items. Now it tells you what items are and what they do. And actually, in the most recent patch I released this week, it now tells you the consumable items if they have one charge or one or more charges. So that helps people, like if they're in a dungeon and they're like, my inventory is full, oh wait, this only has one charge left, I'll use that. Or I need to drink a potion to restore fatigue. Well, it has more than one use, so I know I could get a couple uses out of it at least. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one of the things I've really loved and continue to love about playing it is you have put so much work into enhancing it and still have. And I know you're trying to get to the point where you're done. This is the last patch, but I know it's hard for you because you keep coming up with more things or someone will mention something. Like for me personally, you even did a patch that I had uh, asked about, which was one of my guys was trying to use a ranged weapon and it would always say missed, that I was missing a target.
mhm.
And I couldn't tell if it was because my skill or if because the weapon I was using, was too weak and it was like a not doing damage. And so
Right.
you put that enhancement in, which was great for me because then I could see, it's not my skill. I shouldn't be dumping more points into whatever. I'm actually just using a weapon that's way too weak, and the damage was being absorbed by the enemy's armor. So
Yeah, feedback is an important part of it, and so that was a good one to fix. And it's one of those things where you don't think of it. It's like, well, it's just making a miss if it's too low. But that's like a developer's lazy thing to do. Like you need to think like the customer, the player. Like what's going to tell him what he needs to know.
yeah, and that's so hard to do because everybody plays differently. Everybody's got different
Oh
style.
yeah, I mean there's another streamer who's playing ROA, and he doesn't interact with things. Like he'll just walk into a room and go, "Oh, there's nothing here," and walk back out. And I'm sitting there going, "But you didn't even look at anything."
Oh, that's funny.
So there's nothing I can do about that. I've been made my peace with it. I just watch him play and watch him stumble around.
Right,
So
right. And people, they're still enjoying it, even if they're not finding everything, all the cool things you put in, I'm sure they're still enjoying it.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, are there any big lessons kind of that you've learned watching noob streamers like me, stumbling around doing something that either has taught you something about game design in general or something specific about Realms of Antiquity?
Let's see. I think the major takeaway I did get was a lot of people are very used to in the modern era not having to worry about inventory, like in a CRPG form. Like they're just used to being able to carry everything. And the other thing is nobody uses consumables. Like it's like, oh, I got to hang on to it in case I need it later. It's like you're getting tons of them. Use them up. It's just weird, and it's everyone's kind of a hoarder in the modern era. And as somebody who said, well, I mean, on this other game, I have a party. All the inventory is for the party, not the individual, and I can just hold everything. And I'm like, yeah, that's not old school gaming. Like, and plus, I don't have the memory to store everything you wanted to pick up in the game.
Right, right.
So the other lesson I kind of learned as part of the design was, and early on, I used to have a lot more of the higher end equipment that could be purchased in various places. And then I found out that once players figured out where they were, they just beeline there and bought all the best equipment right away. And it defeated the whole purpose of exploration. So I had to take it all out of stores and start putting it and making it only available if you actually went into those places, which pretty much that would be my one regret, is that if I was to do any other major change, it would be the inventory system would need an overhaul so that quantity could be a part of it for easier storage, and stores could carry something, but once you bought it there, it's gone. There's only one of them.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I know you've enhanced the inventory even since I bought the game because I remember um, before you couldn't just automatically equip a weapon
Yeah.
if you already had one equipped. I know you put an enhancement to automatically do that. So you've definitely made enhancements, and I personally don't find the inventory cluttered.
No, yeah, with the equipping, I realized that the one thing I was worried about was the whole. I have a main and an offhand item equipped, and now I want to do a two-handed weapon. That means it dumps two items back into your backpack. You can't, and that could potentially cause a breakage because you may only have room for your backpack might be full.
Right.
The I believe I think I solved it by having the no. You have to unequip the offhand item first
Uh-huh.
at all times, and then that helps stop that from happening. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
but then that way you can do just an equal swap between the two.
Okay, so Realms of Antiquity has quite a few character classes. What made you come up with those particular ones?
Well, the classic three I wanted was the fighter, wizard, rogue, because those were the three classes from Tunnels of Doom, and of course the hero, the same mechanic. Only a single party can have a hero. That said, you can add party members too. So, and then part of it was based around the magic system. I decided I wanted a magic system based around colors because that was associated with the rainbow orb. So the idea being that every color of light makes up the unity that the rainbow orb represents. And so each of the magic types pretty much just tried to divide each of the colors into different spheres of magic. Obviously, I think red magic ends up being really powerful because it has both healing and fire associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I try to say so for each color there should be a magic using class that it represents. And so the Crusader was basically just a war mage that I thought, oh yeah, no, they're hot. How do you put it? Hot tempered, passionate, zealots, and all that. So that's where the Crusader idea came from. And then Wizard, of course, would be yellow for knowledge and truth, and Ranger would be green. I think I initially thought maybe of doing a Druid, but I thought, no, let's keep it a Ranger because then he's both ranged attacks and green magic. And then the Paladin, blue magic for protection and similar, and orange magic because it's like kinetic and motions and whatnot. Like the Bard, traveling Bard, was a good representation there. And Warlock for purple, which is of course the corruptive and mind control and all that. And Indigo, which as someone told me, that Indigo was only added to the color spectrum because somebody wanted that even number of, they wanted the 7 shades, and so they picked Indigo to go in the middle like there, and it's not really it's not a color that any of us are immediately familiar with. So
Gotcha.
but Indigo, because it represented lightning, and the original hero in Tunnels of Doom started with a lightning scroll, I was like, okay, and of course Zeus being the god of lightning and thunder and all that, I was like, okay, heroes are supposed to be like the son of gods, and so electricity and all that seems really well associated with them.
Yeah, I really like the color concept. I thought that was pretty neat. Do you feel like now that you've seen quite a few people play your game, that most players tend to gravitate toward certain things? Like, do you see a lot of people using the hero class, or do they
Oh
focus?
yeah, the hero class definitely fulfills its job of being the easy mode
Mm,
character, because the hero himself is so powerful that it lets you play and not really get too worried about being in over your head, and so that's nice. Not to mention they can do almost everything. In fact, I've had complaints that people have said like, oh, why can't the hero sense traps like the rogue? And it's like, I gotta give the rogue something. Come on,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and you were mentioning earlier, it's always amazing to me that players want to min max, that they want to go for that sword that's the strongest immediately instead of, actually kind of wanting a challenge. They just want to get the best thing immediately and just use that the whole time. I don't understand that. What's your perspective on it?
Well, I know that in a lot of cases, actually, what I've seen is people are some of the guys who've played the game multiple times over, is what they're obsessed with is trying to win it in different ways, which is exactly what I intended
Mm-hmm.
in class system. I was inspired by when I read about Final Fantasy players, the original first Final Fantasy. People would do different class loadouts, like all wizards or all
Right.
rogues, and stuff, to show that they could win the game even playing like the worst combinations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, I want to encourage that to happen.
Yeah.
So
So you have an attribute called stamina in the game.
mhm.
And basically, it's kind of multi-purpose where it's almost like hit points and spell points or magic at the same time. What made you decide to use that kind of attribute?
Well, part of it was that I didn't want to have a magic point system, because for classes like fighter and rogues, then you just have an empty spot where it's like it doesn't actually matter, you know. And I was also following kind of in the footsteps of the role-playing game GURPS, because they use a fatigue system for their spell casting. And actually, I just found out recently, because my brother started Tunnels and Trolls campaign up, that Tunnels and Trolls took a similar approach in their basic set, which is that spells cost you fatigue, you
Hmm.
know. So, in fact, the problem I ran into really was I had to invent later, I had to add in abilities for the fighter and rogue to burn fatigue with, because fatigue is normally only burned off when you overdo it on your action points and end up going over your allotted amount, and then that becomes converts to fatigue, but it barely affected the rogue and fighter.
Hmm.
So I gave the fighter like their lunge attack, which is like really good and it scales with level, but it also costs fatigue, and then the rogue can vanish naturally, like an invisibility spell. Which, well, one guy just found out that with invisibility, you can literally you can run the entire game and just run away from every combat, other than boss fights that you can't escape from. And in fact, if you hide, you can basically hide, attack, hide again. They can't target you, and then you can just repeat and to defeat the biggest bosses. But it
Wow.
only works with a solo party with a rogue.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, I was kind of like, do I need to fix that? And I was like, nah. It only really is effective in a solo party. If you have any other characters, you can't do it. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. Do you know of any other kind of exploits that people have found?
well, the early one I was when Toady of Dwarf Fortress won the game, and he won it using the stealth spell because he just it let him run by every single random encounter without engaging, and he won the game in 40 hours. So I had to fix stealth so that monsters weren't moving randomly. They're still moving randomly, but they're moving in an agitated way constantly because they know somebody's around them, but they just don't know where they're at.
Hmm.
And then I also disabled the stealth spell on certain maps like dungeons and stuff. So it's only really effective on the surface on the world maps.
So, do you enjoy watching people stream your game, or is it kind of frustrating because, like me, they kind of stumble around sometimes?
I enjoy watching the streaming. It for one thing, it informs me if it helps me find things. Like sometimes I'll spot out, oh man, that door graphic is wrong. You go fix that. And it's the little things like that that even the best of intention testers don't notice. I even had one tell me, "Oh, I thought that was a feature." Then when there was a bug, I was like, "No, that was a bug." so
And
so
do
no, it's actually quite enjoyable to watch.
good. Do you enjoy actually fixing the patches or doing enhancements, or is it more of like to you kind of a necessary evil where you're just trying to perfect the game?
It's hard to say. It's like an itch. You always want to keep going back in to make one last little fix. And I'm kind of like at this point, I'm hoping I'm done with adding new features. That I don't think I need to add anymore. And at this point, it would just be bug fixes.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of I just keep my ear to the ground for bug fixes.
Since you do feel like you're approaching the end of all the bug fixes and features and everything, do you have any plans for different types of games, whether it be on a different platform, just a different type of game on the TI 99? Do you have any plans?
Well, what the root of my inspiration was wanting to develop games on my old home computer that didn't have those games when I was a kid. So I'm probably not done with the TI yet. I know I would have gotten a lot more mileage if I'd written a retro like, which is what Skull of the Black Prior is. It looks like a Commodore 64 game, but it's not. It's a modern day platform, and that offers you a lot of advantages. Case in point, someone asked, like, are you gonna have it in different languages? I was like, I can't really do that with a retro platform.
No.
So I mean, you might be able to get away with a few, but then it's like you get into Chinese or Korean or Japanese, and you're done. You can't even do that.
Yeah. Because you've probably used up almost all the memory, right? That you have.
Actually, no. The Realms of Antiquity occupies a little over a quarter of a 1 megabyte SAMS card.
Oh, okay.
Like
Cool.
but I would say the where you would run into problems is if you make the binary too big, then there won't be a floppy disk that could hold it. I
Ah.
was getting pretty close to that limit. Like
Mm-hmm.
as is, the binary is 192K, and the TI's biggest disk size was 360. So now what you'd have to do if in that case, if you went over that, is you'd have to load it via cartridge instead, which would have more memory. But at that point, you have it's cartridge only uh, requirement. So
Gotcha. Would it be even feasible or possible for a scenario like that if you went a little over, but not a whole lot, to do some kind of data compression? To
probably that would be the best way to do it is some kind of is use data compression. I didn't compress almost anything in the game other than text. Like the maps are all uncompressed, partly because they're not very run length encoding is the most popular method of compression, which is where you store this is the tile and this is the count of them, and then you can crunch things down really nicely. But unfortunately, my maps have a lot of tile variation that kind of makes run length encoding not very effective. So I would have to come up with a different compression technique if I was going to do that. And plus, that's actually the data. Like the actual game binary is a whole other story. Like you
Mm-hmm.
probably don't want that stored in a compressed style. So,
Right.
but at any rate, it's problems that are fixable. It's not and you could go to a cartridge format if need be. I don't know if I'd ever write anything quite that big again. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I've tried to avoid bringing up similar questions that you talked about on the lost sectors because I don't like to repeat information, but I know you spent years working on it and going through multiple cycles and finding out the limitations of the TI-99 and all those types of things, and how you gave advice for developers that if you are going to develop on a retro system, make sure you know all those ahead of time so that you
mhm.
don't spend all this time discovering them and rewriting stuff. So
Yeah.
makes a
Yeah,
lot of
no,
sense.
I have at some point. I had a prototype I wrote that only ran in the original 32K on the TI, but it offloaded everything to disk, and you only had one monster type in a battle because there was no memory for more, and it would have played awful, and it would have looked awful. So
Well, what we got is something awesome. So I'm glad you redesigned all that. So, Adam, what's the oldest memory that you have related to gaming? Whether it was your first memory of a video game you played or seeing somebody do something.
I would probably have to say it was the Atari 2600. My cousins had one, and I remember playing Raiders of the Lost Ark on it. So
Nice.
and we never did end up getting an Atari. But it was they've had some really fun games on the Atari,
Mm-hmm.
and they really pushed the limits. I mean, the technical limitations of that old platform were just insane, and
Mm-hmm.
the fact that it could still produce things that played well. I also remember playing ET, which I don't remember being hating it like people do now. I just thought this is a little boring. Oh no, I fell into another pit again. Oh
Yeah.
my god.
Yeah.
So
When you saw your first video game, did it blow your mind? Were you like, wow, I just can't believe this?
I don't remember. I just remember it being. I think it was because I would only get to see it a couple weeks a year. When I was visiting my cousins, that it was really exotic and cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this was all obviously console gaming. Like computers, I didn't. Computers weren't even on my mind until my dad decided that we should get a computer.
Do you have any funny or interesting stories related to gaming?
Hmm.
Like, did you play games with your brother a lot? Sounds like he's into tabletop a lot.
Yeah, I mean, my brother and I both played like Tunnels of Doom. We would be like just sit side by side and take turns moving the characters. So that's like early cooperative play, I suppose you could call it.
Hmm.
Uh, and my brother, well, he wanted a color computer because his friend had one. So when he did actually get a color computer, then his friend just gave him copies of all of these various games and software, for nothing. So that was kind of fun. Although the funny part, we were so I don't want to say my parents were poor, but we did not have the money to get another color TV. So we only had one in the house. So we had to hook up a black and white TV to his color computer. So we always had to play games in black and white for the longest time.
Oh man, that's
Most
unreal.
yeah, and it's like with the TI, you had this ginormous RF modulator you had to hook up to the TV's back things in order to have it work.
Do you remember kind of a general timeline of the order in which you got either consoles or computers?
Oh yeah, we got the TI for my brother's birthday in '84, which had been that's basically, if you do the math, that's 16 plus 22 years ago. So that would be 38 years ago. And I don't remember when he got his color computer. I want to say he got it for Christmas because he was really not happy getting a TI because it, like I said, his friend had a totally different computer. Uh, then for the next couple of years, he had two friends who owned Commodores, and they would bring their Commodore over when they visited, and that way we could play Ghostbusters, Transformers, Wizardry. No, not Wizardry. It's called Wizard. It was basically a Jumpman game, but with a wizard. And those were all fun. Mind you, they're not kidding when they say that the Commodore 64 was slow. I remember we literally were sitting there waiting for 5 minutes for the game to actually load up. You know, but the Commodore was basically the jam until the Nintendo came out. You know, once the Nintendo came out and we got one, and we didn't get one until 1990, I think.
Wow.
You know, that was like, you know, that was the gaming console. That changed everything.
And then did you get into computers like PCs, Amigas?
Well, my first introduction to a PC was in high school when we had like a tech class and we actually took them apart and put them back together like as part of the class. And that was like Windows 3.11 days and DOS 6 point whatever. And that was pretty cool. And I was using, at that point, I was using my TI to do like papers and stuff because it actually has a really good word processor. So I could actually type up, you know, all my papers and turn them in and all that. And it was worked great for that. And I was trying to learn programming, but trying to learn like basic was fine. Trying to learn assembly without any books or any help whatsoever. Plus, the only assembler I had to start with was they had one that was a line by line assembler that was literally left you with 700 bytes left after you loaded the assembler into memory. It was almost useless to write anything.
Wow.
So yeah, it was tough going. So I didn't actually learn assembly proper until years later when I was pursuing my CS degree.
Yeah, and for
So,
those that don't know or haven't seen the other interview, basically Realms of Antiquity is written completely in assembler, right?
yes.
So
Yeah, there's a couple high level languages for the TI platform, like Forth and whatnot, that can compile down, but old computers don't. It's just easier to write in assembly. It's doable. It's not like modern processors. You couldn't even begin because the amount of stuff modern processors do to parallelize and stuff like that. Plus, they actually pre-execute instructions because they most of the time, 90% of the time, this is the next instruction coming. So we'll just go ahead and do that anyway. If we're wrong, it doesn't actually cost us any time to do. So you can't really write in modern platforms. You can't do assembly there, but on an old computer, it makes sense to because you want to be. That's how you keep your code as tight as possible.
do you prefer playing games with others or do you like to play games kind of solo?
Mostly solo. My brother and I will occasionally like do a little bit of like World of Warcraft or similar together. But that's pretty much my limit. For me, gaming is video gaming is more of a solo activity.
Gotcha. Do you have any favorite genres of games?
Oh, definitely fantasy. I mean,
Art
I've played
just
other.
RPGs or like do you do platformers and things like that too?
Let's see. Well, No Man's Sky, I like. That's actually a space game. And once in a while, my brother and I will play together on that because you can join each other's games and you don't have to deal with other people most of the time. I like Minecraft too. I mean, any building games are always fun because it's always fun to put stuff together. And I actually do like my girlfriend loves Animal Crossing, New Horizons, so I actually will play that once in a while, and that's actually a really well designed game. Anyone who like goes, you know, kids game, it's like, dude, you need to play it. Interface wise, design wise, this is brilliant stuff. Like, I mean, you need to take notes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It makes me wonder sometimes who's developing those games because I had heard a rumor and I don't know if it's true, but I read about it online I'm not sure if you know who D.W. Bradley is. He,
Yeah, he's Wizardry 4 and 5, I think, right?
yeah, he started with five and did six, seven, and eight.
Ah,
He did six and seven exclusively on his own. But I had heard that he was actually working on those kinds of games. Which, most people would think, well, that's a downgrade. You go from this amazing, complicated RPG down to some kind of kids game, that you'd play on Facebook or something. But it makes me wonder, when you talk about that it's actually well-designed games if they, or maybe have some really senior level developers designing something like that.
I could see it because kids are going to be they're your perfect testers. They will do everything the wrong way. So you have to be pretty on the spot with your interface and game design
Hmm.
to make something that they'll keep playing, you know.
That's true. Yeah, good point. Do you have any types of genres of games that you just will never play? You just don't like it at all?
I'm not a fan of real-time strategy like the classic Warcraft and Starcraft. I played those, but I almost inevitably ended up turning on cheat mode because it's like I don't want to be stressed out playing a game. Like, why do I have to tell the Marine to shoot the guy attacking him? Why do I, crying out loud? It's like a micromanager's dream to play that kind of game. But for me, no, it's not. It's not so fun. Of course, conversely, I actually really enjoyed Dwarf Fortress, but I always feel like I can only get so far before it's like, okay, this is getting too much for me to handle, and
Hmm.
and stop playing it. So
Hmm. What do you think about? I know you talked about real-time strategy there. What about like real-time combat with pause, where you can pause and then change the decisions you make?
that works okay. Like the classic Baldur's Gate had that. They introduced the pause system, and that helps because you can just pause, okay, readjust everything, and then play. And it seemed to work pretty well. I know that was largely put in there because they wanted real time, but they recognized that Dungeons and Dragons was not a real time game. Like it was designed to go by turns.
Hmm.
So
So it's kind of a compromise where it's not great, but it's better than just straight real time.
exactly.
Gotcha. Do you prefer console games in general or computer games?
Oh, I'm PC all the way. I actually, at the moment, I think the only console I have two consoles in the house. One is my old GameCube because Zelda Wind Waker is rocks, and I bought that specifically to play it. And I am furious that they have not re-released the HD version on the Switch yet because I really want to play it. And then I have a retro console that does Sega, Nintendo, and Super Nintendo.
Cool. Were you a Sega or Nintendo guy back in the day?
We a friend of mine had a Sega Master System actually, and he later got a Genesis, and I thought it was okay, but we never owned the console directly. The one game I really wanted on that was Gauntlet 4,
Hmm.
which I have a cartridge of it, but it's damaged or something. It only works like 30% of the time.
Oh,
So
that's not good.
yeah, old hardware.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you saying on the Lost Sectors interview that your original TI 99 like had just died when
Mhm.
like before the interview. So it had lasted what, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, yeah. It had a copyright date of 81, and it burned out in 2019. So
Wow.
30, and I don't know exactly. It could have been repairable, but when I talked to some of the guys on the in the TI group, they're like, "Yeah, that's probably like that's just a burnout. Like you're not gonna be able to fix that." So thankfully, I have like 5 other consoles. So
Yeah, cool. So this is a question I ask everybody because I'm really curious about everybody's opinion on this. What do you think it takes to make a great game?
I think it's hmm, to make a great game, it's you have to be passionate about the game design process itself. It's like it's not even the coding that's the important part; it's the design. And then it's also, I think the biggest thing is be ready to change your mind to go a different direction. To me, the most valuable thing ever was just having people play the game and tell me, hey, this could be improved if you did this, or this doesn't seem to work right to me. Yeah. And when you have a solid design, you know that there's not, like, if someone says, oh, you should do new classes or change over the entire class. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that, you know, because I'm confident in that design. But other things, it's the little polishing things that come through that really can just make things that much better. And it's also just a good, it's a good reminder to everyone that, you know, you're not one person can write the game, but it's many people who can actually perfect it.
Do you consider any games kind of revolutionary? And if so, what do you consider revolutionary about those?
Hmm. I mean, there's always famous ones, like Mule back in the day was a really good game. I'm really sorry that there was never a TI version of it. Uh, I think Dwarf Fortress is revolutionary. I know that Dwarf Fortress indirectly led to Minecraft. So, I mean, I have nothing but admiration for Dwarf Fortress.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you got to give props to Doom. Doom changed everything back in the day. You know, and it basically, whoa, a PC can actually have an action game on it.
Right.
You know, holy crap.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
I mean, I don't play any of the modern Doom titles because I'm kind of over that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I kind of like the original design better than the newer ones, but
Mm-hmm.
they, you know, they're good. I'm trying to think what else I'm woefully bad at playing modern games. I rarely buy AAA titles these days. I tend to prefer more independent ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I recently like replayed Planescape Torment, the enhanced edition. That one I enjoy. I have my complaints with its design, and I also kind of recognize now playing it that Planescape was a really revolutionary, cool setting in the 90s, but when you have to explain half the setting to someone so they understand what it is, it's not going to work. You know, I would be surprised, for example, Wizards of the Coast has recently announced that they're re-releasing Spelljammer, which I think that's great because Spelljammer is a very recognizable, easy property. If they try to do the same with Planescape, I'd be like, I don't think you should do that because it really only made sense at the time, like to do something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of its concepts don't even work with modern audiences now. Think about multiverses and stuff thanks to the MCU. Planescape is completely pre multiverse concept,
Mm-hmm.
so it doesn't actually work in as an edgy interesting setting anymore. You basically have to fundamentally change the setting to make it more interesting.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any favorite game developers or game companies?
Hmm. Well, a long time ago, I would have said Origin Systems and Lord British, Richard Garriott. I've cooled a bit off on that because I've come to find out that Richard Garriott, who is, by the way, I still respect him for everything he's done. There's a lot of things though that he hasn't produced anything lately, and honestly, I think he would just be in a much happier place if he admitted that he was done with game design. That that it's not. He had a couple good ideas, but a lot of other people helped him implement a lot of it, and he has at times not really given them the credit they deserve. And also, Origin Systems itself started the AAA game industry expectations of crunched hours and low pay, and you can be replaced like this mentality. And that's not a great thing to belong to. That's not a
Right.
great thing to have started.
Right.
So it may have been inevitable with the way the entertainment industry works. But I think if there was going to be a software engineers union, it will start in the game industry.
Hmm.
And I don't know, it might be necessary. The Screen Actors Guild and the guilds that formed in Hollywood to protect all of the various infrastructure, the crews and stuff that make TV and movies, that's necessary. That is absolutely necessary because a big business will just exploit them otherwise. Frankly, to me, the greatest game designer is The Sims, Sim City. Will Wright. To me, Will Wright, he had not one hit, but two, The Sims and Sim City. And those games are still so fantastic today.
Hmm.
While he maybe has not produced anything recently, I'm okay with that. Like, I think that, if you have one or two hits in your lifetime, then you're already ahead of the game.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting though that is the case, that a lot of game designers, they only have one, like you only see them, like they only have one or maybe two things.
Mm-hmm.
This is even carries over into other fields like the role-playing game industry. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, they had one hit.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And that's all they needed. But
Mm-hmm.
anytime they tried to design anything else, it didn't work. Pretty much anyone, even the biggest Gary advocates, will tell you his Legendary Journeys and his other games that came later were not great.
Right.
Were not good. And Dave Arneson was not a designer at all. Apparently, his notes were so, they had to hand off his notes to somebody to interpret because he was so bad at writing things down. So, and but there are, and I think that's the case, is a lot of the game designers are ones you don't think of.
Mm-hmm.
They're just the quiet ones who are just producing games year after year. In role playing, it's like Monty Cook.
Mm-hmm.
He and his team, they keep consistently producing new, interesting games year after year. And it's surprising to me that people don't acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they just want those big stars, and they don't realize it's kind of more the workhorses that make things happen.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about passion being really important for making a great game. Because, your first game is probably one that you're most passionate about because you've probably been thinking about it for years. And so, you finally have the ability to make it and you put all that passion into it. And then, it's a huge hit a lot of times. And then what, you have to try to think of another game and, well, am I that passionate about this one? I don't know.
Yeah, that is true. I have a next project I'm planning to start, but I'm kind of taking my time on it. I don't want it to force it.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's another thing that the TI never had, which would be a roguelike.
Hmm.
Although I want to go not just, anyone could produce a rogue game, it's like, no, you got to make it your own,
Mm-hmm.
I even have a title for it and everything. So,
Cool.
but the actual design work, it's still in design, but I'm going to want to take my time on it and make sure it's the kind of game I want to play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I mean, when you were working on Realms of Antiquity, you're doing that in your spare time, right? You were working full time, or is that true?
Yeah, I work full time, and so all my game design work is basically a hobby.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's really hard to do because you can come home from work, whether it's remote or not, you expend all this brain power with work and then you got to work more, on something. So,
yep, yeah, exactly. I mean, it went easier once I stopped trying to, like I said, once I got out of the mentality of I have to make it fit on the original TI. I was
mhm.
like, no, get over that.
Yeah, really appreciate what you've done. It's going to be out there forever now, and so many people are going to enjoy it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad it's out there. Uh, in some ways, it's actually ironic that because I put it on Steam, and Steam sends you money, but they also do your taxes for you, and they don't take anything out, which means it actually ends up being a case of, oh yeah, look at all these extra taxes I have to pay because of Steam. Great.
That's funny. Uh, Funny, but not.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's part of it is that it's, I know that there are some people that really try to make a living out of being a small independent game publisher, and I have nothing but respect for them because it is hard.
Mhm.
Because you actually do have to. Me, I'm like, oh, if I sell 100 units, I'm fine. They're like, I have to sell this many units or I am in big trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have to really push the get it out the modern audiences, get it advertised, do everything they can to really publicize it. Ever since I released a game on Steam, I get emails every month from various guys saying, "Hey, we'll promote your game for you. Just send us a couple free game keys."
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I don't think so. Because
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, trying to be an independent game developer with how complex games have become is so hard to do. I mean,
oh yeah,
the art, the graphics. I mean, it's when I interviewed Michael Cranford, that's one thing he talked about in the '80s. You know, when he did Bard's Tale, you could be a one man shop and kind of do it all if you know you had the talent. But now, if you tried to make a modern game, not a retro, type
yeah.
game, but the amount of graphics and artwork and sound, everything you need is just so ridiculous. You just can't do it as a single person.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had one piece of music in the game which I got permission to use, and I had to transcribe myself in assembly, mind you,
Hmm.
to raw notes and all that, and then all the graphics I drew myself. But I have known. I mean, if you're doing a modern platform, you got to hire an artist, an actual bona fide artist,
Yeah, yeah.
and actual music composers,
Hmm.
and pay them what they're worth because they are worth it. You know,
Hmm. Hmm. Do you generally gravitate toward buying games from independent game developers?
yeah, I try to keep my eye out for any kind of new interesting games that are not actually mainstream.
Hmm.
It's not. I don't have any. Yes, I have still a residual dislike of Electronic Arts, but they're going to sink themselves the way they're going.
Yeah.
So, but like I saw one game, it's called Plunder Run, and it's a little platformer, and it looks like an old Commodore game, but and it's beautifully done, incredibly hard. I can't even get past the second level, but damn that, I mean, it was a couple bucks on itch.io to buy it. Money well spent,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm always telling my subscribers about your game and how hopefully I'm pushing more people toward it because everybody that I've told about that has seen it, wow, this is an awesome game. I haven't heard a single negative comment. So
Yeah, I was happy for a long time. I had 100% positive review on Steam until this one guy came along, and he bought it. He asked questions in the chat. I tried to answer him, and then he immediately went negative and did a refund, which means he only had it for 6 hours. And everybody, I was so despondent. I was just like, oh, that sucks. And some of the other guys on our Discord channel went and investigated him. He was like, dude, this guy's like, he goes around and trashes games all over. We all are going to downvote him to make that disappear. So
yeah, that's too bad. But yeah, your game is well received and loved by many. So hopefully we'll just get more and more to go your way.
yeah, the most frequent question I get from people is, when's the sequel coming out? And I'm just like, oh, I don't know. I have only, like, I mean, I have about as much idea of the sequel as George Lucas did when asked about the prequels, which was like he probably had a couple lines jotted down on a napkin.
Right.
And it's not just even the game design, it's the story. It's
Hmm.
really like, what kind of story would you be wanting to tell
Hmm.
with a sequel?
Hmm.
And I kind of want to I want to do some other projects
Right.
first too.
Right.
So I at one point I thought I might do an expansion on the existing game, which would just be like, it would almost be like a World of Warcraft expansion where there's a whole other island over here. And but I kind of abandoned that idea because I couldn't really think of one. I'd have to break the existing game saves to make it work, which is not really that great. And then the other problem is that I couldn't come up with enough interesting content to really make it worth it,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like, I'll just take some of the stuff I was doing, like new spells, and put it in a patch in the
Hmm.
current game, which
Hmm.
seems to have been well received by
Hmm.
one of the other streamers. Really likes to use the ice ball spell, which is basically fireball but with ice.
Hmm.
And one of the other testers commented, Mind Blast is great because that's like Violet really lacked an area effect spell. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And plus, like you were saying earlier about the passion, I mean, you've worked on this for so long. you've produced something that so many people are enjoying now. I could see, you wanting to move on to something else, get some other type of game going. And the game is huge. I don't know why anyone would need an expansion to it. I mean,
Yeah, that actually also is the other thing is I think I reached about the limit of depth that I can achieve with the current engine. I actually in the latest patch just added another gun to the game.
hmm.
Spoiler alert: it's Ash's boomstick from the Army of Darkness.
Oh, cool.
You can find it in the museum, and it says that a hero of old left this behind, and
Ah,
so it kind of fills in a nice little gap of giving you a good gun in the game. It takes two shot per fire, but it does really good damage.
hmm.
And I was like, oh, that's probably good for balance just to throw that in. You
Hmm.
know,
So if you could change one thing about the gaming industry right now, today, what would that be? Like if you had a magic wand.
trying to think, the industry on a whole is I think it needs to get. I would like to see more smaller, modest. I think the get away from big, expensive AAA titles and go more for smaller, funner games. I mean, there's a reason the mobile game market is wildly successful and makes tons of money. It's because they're making the small, simple games we've played for 40 years. They're just putting on the phone so everybody can get to it. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, I remember for a while I was obsessed with the spot matching games. The ones where we're going to show you this scene and you have to press things and all that. And I was actually interested in the narrative that they were doing because it was like a murder mystery
Mm.
type thing. But then I fell off of it because it became clear they wanted you to pay money, so they were
Yeah.
micro transacting you left and right. Like, oh, you can only play this long, and then you have to pay money to keep playing. And I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah. That's
Would
funny.
say that's one thing I would like to see go away. Microtransactions.
Mm.
Those are terrible.
Hmm.
Those don't belong in games.
Yeah, we are kind of spoiled today with so many games to choose from. Back in the 80s, you had such a limited selection. They were expensive, hard to find. Now you can find so many types of games that you're almost we're spoiled for choice to the point where it's hard to narrow in on what should you spend your time on because
Yeah,
you have a limited amount of time.
yeah. Time has always been the limit, and I mean, at least in the past. I mean, when anybody complains about all the glut or all the bad games, I'm kind of like, it hasn't changed.
Hmm.
Everything was crappy back in the 80s too. It's just that it was on cassette rather than downloadable from the internet. And games, it was just, they were smaller scale.
Hmm.
I mean, I would play games written in BASIC that ran in 12K of memory, and they still occupied time. They still were fun to play.
Hmm.
The only difference in now is the size of the platforms, the memory and the CPU they have. But other than that, it's still simple games that occupy your time.
Hmm.
So, and there's still just as much cruddy games now as there were then.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. True. Okay, so last question I have for you, Adam, is do you predict that there's going to be any big changes to the industry coming up, or do you think it's just going to keep going the direction it's going now?
I think it's gonna continue pretty much as it has right now, just because there hasn't been any major changes. I mean, the pandemic drove a lot of people indoors, so more people played games. That definitely had an impact on the role playing game industry because that's when they suddenly started to realize that Dungeons and Dragons actually made more money than the Hasbro toy line did,
Hmm.
or at least Wizards of the Coast did. I think I need to include Magic the Gathering in that. So, but the whole point being that kind of surprised everybody. I think
Hmm.
that they weren't expecting that.
Hmm.
So I don't know if there's any similar kind of shift that's going to happen with the gaming industry. I think it pretty much is going to. I think we need like another major console release or something to really see if anything shakes up or changes,
Hmm.
or see somebody actually be able to compete with Steam.
Yeah. It's for those watching, where can they get a copy of your game?
You can get it. You can obviously go to Steam and get it there. That's quick and easy. If you have your own problems with Steam, and I've met a few people who actually actively don't want to buy from Steam, you can get it from itch.io. And also, if you are really don't want that, a good friend of mine has it up on arcadeshopper.com. He also has a very limited number of collector's editions remaining, which would be
Ooh,
the actual tangible box with a map, manual, and reference card. You can
nice.
also choose to have retro discs or cartridge if you want to actually run it on your actual TI. Bear in mind that you do need the correct hardware for it to run.
Right. Nice. And I bought two physical copies. I got the original, and then when you came out with the larger cloth map,
Yep.
I
And
snagged
I do
another one of
have
those.
several of those larger cloth maps also available. This is, ooh,
It's filtering it.
yeah, I kind of figured it might do that.
There we go.
This is the actual game box. This is one I had to set aside because one of my cats scratched an edge of it. And so I'm kind of like, well, I'll keep this one as a spare. but but yep, that's the actual game box. Yes, games used to come in boxes, kids.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for this, Adam. This was a lot of fun, very informative. I know people are going to love this interview. Really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it too. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, subscribers, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.